Hello. Wait for a few. Oh, we're coming. Hi, everybody. So, lots to talk about, I think, this week, but some rather an interesting topic as well that somebody sent me, which I think is well worth a look. So I've been speaking to a couple of Australians today for most of the day on a conference call, and so questions that are being asked, I suppose, are these protests real in Australia, in Melbourne? Now, a question that I asked today got the answer, yes, these are real tradesmen doing this, or tradies as they call them. So these protests are in the main made up of real tradesmen who are pissed off because they can't go to work. Of course, there's the agent provocateurs as you'd expect, but it is in fact tradesmen protesting that they are told they have to have the vaccine before they can go to work. So that's one thing cleared up for me today. Also, looking at some of the videos that are coming out of Australia with these protests and police brutality, as it were, so much of it seems to be being done on the Flinders line. It's like a ley line, if you will. Some very important buildings. There's a monument that's an octagon, basically. And so much of what's going on in the protest arena in Victoria is on the Flinders line. So that's well worth taking note, because they do the same in London. They always encourage them to be end at Trafalgar Square. And again, you can follow ley lines if you are aware of that kind of stuff in and around London. So there's something going on with this, sort of why they're only focused to these particular places. And I think that's worth taking note of, to be honest, especially if they're being scripted in order they can frighten the Australians before they have to come out and be dealt with that way. It must be less expensive to create the scenario of absolute fear. Don't dare go against these police because they're baboons. I mean, sure, that's got to be a script that they're putting out because that is what people will see. It must be much cheaper to do that than to actually have to face the public on the street. So I'm wondering if a lot of this kind of stuff is a bit of theatre. They were talking today about the old lady that was thrown to the floor and then pepper sprayed. And I did say that when I first saw that picture to that video, first thing I thought was that's a bloke with a wig. Now, he said that, yeah, that's been recognised in Australia. He said, but there were a couple of people that were actually there that he's spoken to, and they said it was indeed a female. So why have they thrown that man with a wig on? I don't know. Interesting. So there's a few snippets of stuff like that coming out from Australia, and one that I saw this week, which were a bit odd and a bit sinister, was the Australians were just going about their day-to-day shopping. And then there were the sort of, there's an entrance to this shopping mall, and there's this rather strange stone, I suppose it's supposed to be art, I couldn't see it as that myself. But so they're about the day-to-day shopping, walking the dogs, roller skating, on the bikes, etc. And all of a sudden, a shed load of police, if that's what we can call them these days, a shed load of these black uniform things marched on to the front of this stone statue and pretty much lined it in a square. And the video is showing how the people, the Aussies, are just like, what's going on here? What's this all about? There were no protests or anything going on. This were just people shopping. And one woman said, as she's walking past, why are they doing that? There's nobody here. So it was a real shock to everybody that were just doing the day-to-day. Now, people walking around and etc., and the police didn't seem to be bothering anybody. But it was just very strange that they just all of a sudden just poof, marched on and lined themselves up around this pretty odd stone statue outside this shopping mall. So I'm wondering what could they possibly be doing there? That is just a bit weird. So there does appear to be a lot of theatre going on with these Australian protests. Now, that's, as I've said, it's been made clear today that the guys that are marching and protesting are tradesmen because they want to earn the crust and they've been told they can't. So that's definitely going on there. But the rest of it, I'm not so sure. There's some strange things if you take note, to be honest. You know. Oh, you don't mind me saying, watch Victoria Cotton on YouTube. She explains what you have just said. Oh, about the ley lines. Okay. And the dates of 2017 to 2023. That's interesting because one of my associates in Australia has been throwing this down my neck for quite a few years, not just in relation to these protests, but pointing out this particular system of ley lines in Victoria, Melbourne. So great. I'm going to definitely take a look at this one because, you know, you can't really get away from it when you see the pictures, the lines, how they work, how they're incorporated different buildings, etc. And a very creepy monument, which early on there was a lot of images of like bloody stormtroopers, again squared on this octagon monument with pyramid capstone missing. So there's some very potent stuff going on in the architecture, which will mean it's deliberately built because it's operating within this energy line, as it were. And as I said, the same in London. You can do this pretty much anywhere you go in these cities where these protests tend to be. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look at that. That's going to be interesting because we haven't actually found anybody else that's been speaking of that. So whether she's been shadow banned, maybe, but we have searched. So there are some strange things going on in Australia, and I picked up one today where it's pretty clear that Daniel Andrews, who's the idiot running Melbourne, Victoria, or that area in particular, he's now come out that he did a deal with China in 2017. And basically what that plan is that it's his job to relieve Melbourne, Victoria, and its population from any federal government control. So that's your law out of the window, you know, it's your civil service out of the window operating in accordance to your law. So that is basically, it would seem, what Andrews did in 2017. And it's not a secret now. I think it's already mainstream, in fact. So that's another interesting factor going on with Australia. And of course, we're talking China, the corporation, which has basically been in bed with Israel for a very long time and with Russia and the reason why all the secrets of the West have been handed to both Russia and the Chinese corporation. So basically, Israel has stolen everything, and now they are going to demolish us, before we find out probably that they robbed everything. Now, we're talking Israel, we're talking about the government, we're talking about the intelligence services there. We're not necessarily talking about every single Jew or every single Israeli. You know, we've got to differentiate, and we've got to do that with every nation. You know, gone are the days where if a nation's being bad, then by definition it's public and bad as well. You know, I think we can all see now that all our nations have been hijacked by this cult, a very powerful cult, and it's been very well hidden until now, I suppose. So, so yeah, interesting stuff going on in Australia. But again, and I do say this to my Australian associates, that you're having it bad, but this is what they were doing here in Blighty from 27th of December till June to terrify the numpties into taking the shot. And of course, they didn't really need to go that extreme, but they did because they just all run to get it anyway because they wanted to go on holiday. So the holidays now is the new only force of reckoning that almost pray to enough to even get the shot. So yeah. So I've put it across to them that you know they're hammering them like you wouldn't believe because there's a short uptake. There's not that many taking the shot, and that until they get that a percentage of at least some value, they can't roll out the rest of it. The papers, all the nonsense that they're trying to create now in Blighted through making everything a shortage now. So we've just had this week the media go crazy about fuel shortages, and of course all the numpties have gone out and made sure that there was a fuel shortage, and the petrol stations became empty yesterday. It's come back to normal again today, it would appear, just a few pumps in each station that are actually empty, and this has prompted a lot of wagon or HGV drivers. And one guy in particular who trains the tanker drivers, which is a bit of a specialist industry. And he's come out and said it's absolute garbage. There is no shortage of drivers because he trains them. It's like rocking horse shit to become one of those drivers. Now, what I do know personally, and again, this is worth putting out because what we do know in this country is there was always a major call to get the freight on the rail to save the roads basically from being demolished by all this weight. And of course, it would reduce the congestion on the motorways. So that's what my grandparents used to talk about when I was growing up, how it should be on blah, blah, blah. So it was a big thing. So I registered from that there's obviously then a reason why they're keeping it on the highway, or as they term it, the roads. And growing through and growing up, as I learned things, I started to realise that the majority of transport, in order for it to become a Masonic operation, then it had to be kept off the rail, especially when the rails here were actually national and not as they are today, up for Richard the Branson to rob us blind on his shit trains. You know, so there's definitely been a major reason why they've kept the road haulage into the hands of the Masonic. And then I have seen as well in my time that if you're a good little Mason and you're just coming through the ranks and you know you want to be a driver, then of course as you obey and show that you're a lovely little puppy, you'll get a pat on the head then, and they may offer you to go for your tanker driver, which it's a pretty set piece. I think it's at 60 to 80 grand a year. All the benefits, the pensions, the lot, the blah, the blah. Basically, it's one of them gifts that this, you know, the Brotherhood gives out to its young schlays, as it were. So I can see then that this guy who's coming out from, who trains these guys to drive the tankers and gives them the certification, he's saying this is bullshit. So take that a step further, then for that to be the case, somebody's controlling these drivers. And if they're all Masonic, there we look again, okay? We have to look at it in this way, because they are facts that I know to be so, that the majority of haulage on the road is Masonic, and it's been deliberately set that way. So, yeah, he's saying there's no shortage, so we know that they weren't getting the deliveries. We've also heard that the actual places where they go to fill are full. There's no problem there. There's no problem from the import at all. So we would have to consider that that is entirely a secret society blag, and it worked a trick. For 2 days, you couldn't get fuel from anywhere. And so, the power of the media and the television, everybody run out as though the world was going to collapse tomorrow, which is why you want to keep a reasonably old diesel. And I'm not talking about, so maybe 2005, 2006, maybe 2007, before they start putting all this shit in it. Because you can stick any old garbage in your petrol tank, your diesel tank, and your thing will chug along like, there's no tomorrow. So it's always a good idea to keep an oldish diesel in good nick. One that you can stick chip pan oil in and such. Because you could even grow your own rapeseed and produce it, if it ever got to that extreme. So that's an idea to keep in mind if you're looking to, because these are just toys that they've got to play everybody with, isn't it? Food, fuel, gas, electric, and then I think it was Wednesday of last week. The morning story was, oh, how dependent we are on Russia for gas. Well, I've been bleating on about this for absolutely donkey's years, and exposed all the housing associations who, in the upgrade that they had to take on with these properties in order to get control of them into the trusts, they had to upgrade the properties that was in the contract. I couldn't get hold of this contract for love nor money. They wouldn't give it me. No. But I knew it was in there because I'd been told it was in there by somebody who'd seen it. So when it came to those upgrades, what they actually did, all the housing stock under council control back in the day could heat. You could heat your water by two methods: by electric as an emergenator, and also through gas. Okay, because they had gas central heating as well. So you two methods of actually heating your water. When they upgraded, they put everything on gas, every single property, and you're talking, over 1 million properties here, just in maybe 4 or 5 of these housing groups now that have just basically stolen what are taxpayers' properties and are handing it over to this refugee platform. Yeah. So this is what's happening. And then again, people that are working for these operations, again, are people that have been tapping on the back for being a good little boy. And so that's another method of keeping our assets in their hands. Yeah, and you see now, we've just seen what's happened with the fuel. What are their abilities with these housing associations, if not as they are already, which is kicking out natives and opening these properties up for these refugees that are coming in from all over the shop. So, yeah, we've got to start to see it like this. These are preconceived and they're planned and they're carried out to perfection because it's Masonic. Now, he's announced that he wants to sort of lessen the visa regulations for foreign drivers. Well, that'd be another way of handing over our infrastructure, or a big chunk of our infrastructure, to hands that wouldn't really be giving a monkeys whether your grandma and your auntie Mildred gets breakfast. Can you see what I'm saying here? So we're out to Europe. What's this garbage? Because they're blaming Brexit for everything, and that's a complete and utter load of garbage. Okay, that again is being promulgated, and it's an agreement between both sides, because this is all about hitting us. It's about dismantling our nations, our civil systems, our rights, our laws, our culture. That's what this is about, and it's going on in all different nations. So we have to recognise these things, that this is actually what's going on. So now they're playing with fuel shortages, and they're also they're trying to encourage a fuel shortage, which again they announced this week. And lo and behold, as I went to get me in my little shop, which is just a few things each day, I heard the cashier speaking to somebody who were asking why the shelves were empty, and they were saying, well, it's not because we've no deliveries, it's because people have been coming in all week and buying trays of stuff. I mean, you've got to recognise the power of the media when they create that kind of thing, and how it can actually create the very thing that they're saying is already happening, when in fact it actually isn't. But if we do this too often, we could actually create a position where the silos do run out of stock, and then there might not be any deliveries for maybe a month or 2 months. Now, and this is all going to be created based on our behaviour. If every time they play this nonsense game, everybody runs out, I'm all right, Jack, you see, it's not going to work. And these little scenarios that maybe are just nothing really could then turn into something a bit more serious. And that, now, people, is the Bolshevik method. You've got to recognise this. Now, just because we've got a bunch of numbskulls claiming to be Tory, claiming to be conservative, they're nothing of the sort. These are as Bolshevik as Gordon Brown. You know what I'm saying? You've got to understand what happened when the Eurosceptics were causing out a lot of problems for Thatcher. Goldsmith set up the Eurosceptic Party, I forget its name, which ended up becoming UKIP. One man created that scenario, a guy called Harry Bekow, a Russian-German Jew, who were bigged up because he had something to do with the code-breaking operation during the Second World War, Bletchley House, is it? And so we got into him, exposed him, and pretty much saw him, hang on, mate, this is not right good. Because he was running the UKIP committee that were running UKIP, basically. And then in 2010, Cameron does his being elected speech conference in is it the November, and bigs himself up for the next election, which is when they actually got in as the coalition. And at the end of his speech, he started bigging up this guy without naming him, saying, without this man, there would be no us, no Tory party, etc. Who pops up? Mr. Harry Beckoff. So you've got Harry Beckoff controlling the UKIP, and you've also got him totally responsible for this Tory party we've got, as says David the Cameroon. Okay? So can you see this game that's playing out here? This is Bolshevism. They are not conservative. Okay? They're not. And the boundary games they're playing in my area, because they keep trying to amalgamate areas, boundaries, etc. So they're at the moment trying to itch us up with Whalley and Clitheroe, Ribble Valley, which for us, Ironburn, would be very beneficial. Let me say that right now, by a long shot. Okay? You're looking at the heart of Lancashire. You know what I'm saying? Or let's say one of the hearts, because there are quite a few, and you could say the area around Lancaster, Loon, that's another heart of Lancashire. But the Ribble Valley it's a heart of Lancashire, and so it would be in our benefit to tie up with the Ribble Valley, make no mistake about it. However, they're depending on the fact that there are a big conservative grouping within that new batch, if we can put it together. They're considering that and that alone will keep this current MP in, who is yet just another puppet of this not really Tory group in place for at least the next 10 years, it's been spoken in my town. So there's a real game going on here, and it's obfuscating the fact that even though we've got Boris the Johnson, the blonde bombshell, who pretends to be Tory, mates around with Tories, etc., is in fact a full-blown Bolshevik fascist bastard. Okay? They've already slaughtered Grandma. I think that's February, March, April, according to the Undertaker now on the platform. There was one before him, who I haven't seen again. So thank you, Mr. O'Looney. I bet you had some time at school with that one, pal. Oh, my God. I can imagine that shit, man. So, I'll tell you what. Before we move into what I'd really like to discuss, let's have a look at what some of you guys have saying, now is the time to heal and how the planets are moving in the X around the planet. Lavette on YouTube has some great info too. Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at, okay, let's dip our tooties in a bit of esotericism, shall we? Why not? It's Sunday after all. So, if you go back to, as I've already sort of mentioned in these videos, about how when you are sort of absorbing how the occult world works, you're not operating on gravity and all that pish. You're dealing on ether, you know, that magnetic fields, frequencies that come with life in them, without body and such. Okay, so if you take some of the sort of narratives that come from that kind of thing, then you're looking at this idea that the world at the moment now is sort of fixing frequency, as in, so the lowering of the sunspots must unlock something that fixes. So if you're whatever frequency you're operating in currently, because we've all been given our opportunities to grow, we've all been given our opportunities to move ourselves to the best frequency we can actually attain, then what they're saying is there'll become a point when the grid snaps in, and that's where you will be fixed for this next round of reality. Let's be quite frank about it. Whatever it is, we don't know, but whatever we do know, this, it is our reality, okay, and we have to deal one way or another, okay, so we can't escape it. So yeah, I understand what you're saying there. Yeah, well, and I hope that's in sync with what you're saying, at least anyway. Hello, Life Mix. Hello, Huffy Jet. Hey, yes, Ray, how you doing, mate? Cause hello, Johan Francis, good vid. Well, thank you very kindly, sir. Look at the logos, names, etc. of the haulage firms. Exactly. You've got Widow's Son. You know, you when you know a bit about that, it's everywhere. Okay, it's everywhere. You know, same with mechanics. A lot of these mechanics that are doing you down and doing you badly, they're doing it deliberately. You know, you have to be bloody careful these days. Which mechanics you use. I've been using a right bunch of jokers who are supposed to be Volvo experts, but honestly, what a mess, and it's a shame. So, you know, mine's going to a mechanic from now on, not a bunch of Johnny come latelys. So you've got to change. This is the thing right now, as we are. We've got to start changing how we are. We've got to adapt now. Otherwise, you can't keep hanging on for this old thing. It's just being demolished and removed from under our feet. So we have to adapt. And we have to work out what's worth carrying forward into this unknown end of cycle rune, as it were. So we're using the runes. We are in the end of a cycle and we're about to enter another. And at that point, the rune of unknown, the unknowable, is active and it's empty. And it's going to be filled now with all you've learned in your last 7-year cycle. And you're going to fill it up as you move into this new one with everything you've achieved. And that is where we are. And on the video I did, Fork Tongue, I tried to present that essence of that feeling in that tune that I wrote, put together for the background of it. So it's the essence of it is that we're all basically in the same dance at the moment, which is we're desperately trying to find that comfy tune, that comfy rhythm, so we can settle back into some kind of normality. And then every now and again, we just get that maybe 2 bars of it, and then bang, in comes some other nonsense to knock you off. And so that tune was trying to just get that across. How at the moment the dance is, we're trying, but these things just keep coming in and just taking it off rhythm. Yeah, it's So yeah, that's definitely where we are. So the unknowable rune is perfect for describing exactly where we are today. So it's so important that you cleanse yourself for this time now. So many of them are running off into this world of pain that's just going to, and well, has basically already annihilated them. It's just going to be a slow process for most, and they're stuck hanging on to the old because they've no imagination as what could be in the future, and they've no recognition of what was good from the past. So we're in a good position in essence as well because we don't have to reinvent anything at this point. We just have to pick what we know worked from before and remove what we know didn't as an aim, an intent, a thought pattern as people start to come together. Um, outside this kind of insanity that's being pushed everywhere at the minute. Victoria Cotton is some astrologer for one astrologer. Look, don't knock astrology. I know that the religions have always poo-pooed it, but I think what the essence of that was just to help people not open themselves up to this other system that is entwined in the seeking of that kind of knowledge, But if you're a strong character, if you know what is right and what is wrong, you don't have to fear entering anything. Because if your behavior is correct, then the potential endings of certain frequencies that are in that mix that you're in won't ground, because your frequency will not attach to them, and therefore that destiny will not carry out. So if that is somebody else's will set against you, as long as you stay on the correct frequency and you don't ground that frequency that's being aimed at you for a blockage or for any other dastardly deed, then you have no fear to have. And if it does get a bit negative, you will learn something from that. It's the old adage: you've got to learn. If you're going to learn something, you've got to experience it. Which is why old school apprenticeships lasted a long time. They were making sure you totally and utterly absorb the vibe, the mindset, the thought patterns that you needed to be whatever skill it was you were going to enter. And if you mastered everything, you could then pass that on to the next generation, and you're not giving them it half baked. You see, it's very important that things get passed down to our children. And this is where the Native Americans are absolutely, they shone at it, because everything was passed down in stories. Because stories tend to repeat exactly as they're given. You write things down, as we ascertained in from the Stanford lecture, that the creation of actual these languages other than our innate grammatical structure was, you could say, the commencement of lies being accepted, as it were. Do you know? It's so yeah, it's important what we pull from what has been to carry forward into the future, especially for our young generations, because they are really, I mean, I don't like to say this because it's not actually their fault, but they are the most ridiculous generation that I've ever studied. And they are, I would say, they are going to be in a worse position than the baby boomer was and is when they get to an age. Um, it's a sad indictment, but that is the situation, and we have to accept it, acknowledge it. And these kids are going to need something to hold on to in the future when they do become a bit more self-thinking, not so much self-absorbed, which is a problem they seem to have now, but a bit more bit more thought to the environment they're in, and I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about you near and dear, how you interact with people, because not everybody is a bitch. You know what I'm saying? It's there's no respect in the communications either. It's ridiculous, because you can imagine what their offspring are gonna how they're gonna be. It'd be another notch down again on that. So if you're calling your wife a bitch and a yes, yeah. And then they get it on phones, and then they say, "Well, what's an over?" Oh, it's a porn. There's no respect. It's the respect that they've sort of removed through generational cultures, the shifts in culture by music, by film, and this is how they create them divisions, as we've discussed before. Anyway, so don't poo-poo astrologers. That's what we were saying, weren't we? Because I did my own chart many, 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 many moons ago. I'm quite shocked how it pretty much hit the buttons when looking at my potential character traits. Excuse me, I think I picked up a lurgy or something. Anyway, so don't poo-poo it. It does have meaning, and it can help you. It can also help your enemies if they know your stuff as well, but that's what we're all here, and we all potentially going to be hit with that at some point, so yeah, I would never poo-poo astrology. It does have its I'm not talking about these numpties that give you every day on a bloody magazine or anything like that. I'm talking about if you actually study the influence that the planets as a frequency have on the Earth, and then especially when they're aligned with other planets, etc. This is all about changing frequencies that are all available to us down here. And if you can map that and start to understand it, then you can enhance your capacity down here, for anything, And a lot of successful people that are not necessarily have gone down the dark path of joining the secret societies for the Pets Mean prizes, but a lot of people that have been successful in their own right are aware of this kind of stuff, and they will use it because it has a resonance, you see. But that's when you get away from the science that you all know and move back to how it used to be. And if you want an extremely expert testimony to that fact, then just actually read what Tesla said, rather than just knowing him via quotes, because he dealt entirely in that paradigm, and at any moment he could, he would abuse Einstein. Rightly so. Einstein were a blag, and pretty much saved this nonsense science that were going up its arse. Because back then we still had real scientists, real chemists, real physicists. Not this, I have a skill and a certificate that says I'm amazing. Well, I'm sorry, but I've listened to a lot of you guys, and you talk out your ring piece. Even, I have to say, and I will say this, I continue to watch the Stanford lecture on schizophrenia that I mentioned in one of the other videos, and though I was very impressed with his delivery and some of his data towards it, as you got further on, you can see that this is the shit that they're preaching, and it was pseudo garbage pish to label everybody for this nonsense. So as much as I praised him for his info, and again, it goes back to, it doesn't matter who you watch, if you've got discernment, you will pick the shit out from the crap. It doesn't mean you have to believe this man. And just because I pointed him out to you and said, yeah, I've listened to the rest of his stuff, and it's puke, pseudo babble, psychological pish, in order that they're superior and you're not, okay? And you can become a patient. Patient, you don't want to be that. So yeah, don't poo-poo the astrology but you've got to study it so that you understand what it is when you do your own chart, so you understand what it's saying. And the more you study that, the more you'll get a grasp on your own character traits, and it can help. I mean, I studied palmistry, tarot, all different forms of tarot. The only one I didn't actually complete was the I Ching, and that was because I was lazy. I had the time allotted to do all of these together back in the day, and the only one I couldn't be asked with the I Ching. So I know I am missing something in relation to those sciences because I didn't complete that. Maybe I might do when I'm a dodder with walking stick and beard, goatee beard and big wispy eyebrows and that, which I have actually now if I don't cut them. They go look a mad professor. And I'm not a mad professor. Well, I don't think I am anyway. Right, Jeff, they'll hold your comment if you swear. Okay. I think the only thing I've put on these comments as a censor is swear words. That's it. So if you don't swear on it, and he'll not hold your comment, it'll come up. So I only discussed this last time that I have to do this. I didn't even know. So one here. Well, I can't understand that one. Anyway, I need to get back to where we actually were. Oh, harp. No. Dev, this is it. I've started to write a report about it, actually, and I was meant to publish it, but I haven't got around to it. Now, when Melbourne had the quake, so-called earthquake, I was doing a video chat with an associate in Melbourne, right? So this were early hours. And she sat there and she's saying, oh, this building's shaking, and I could hear it. I could hear it plain as day, shaking, right? And she were obviously rather perturbed, and I were about to say, run out. I said, because we had one up here in North a few years ago, and I felt that, and it was rather scary. But I didn't, and it lasted for about maybe 40 seconds at different intensities. So it'd go intense, then and then again, and it did it for about 40 seconds. So she were rather perplexed about this, and I'm like, "Ooh, bloody hell, fire! What's that all about?" And she's saying, "Well, we don't usually have earthquakes." So as soon as it stopped, she rang a neighbour. Now, it took a while for a neighbour to come because a neighbour was in the garden, as she told us when she answered the phone. So she answered the phone and she said to her, "Did you feel that?" And she said, "What?" She said, "That shaking." And she said, "No." She said, "Well, you didn't feel any shaking whatsoever?" She said, "No." She said, "Well, it just feels like we just had an earthquake." So she said, "Well, no, I haven't felt anything." So she was outside. Now, we did discuss it and thought that was quite odd. Now, a couple of days later, I picked up this Aussie guy who was saying that this wasn't a quake for exactly the same reasons as I witnessed firsthand on a video chat, okay? And I heard the rattling of these buildings. And he was saying that this was not an earthquake. He said because the earth didn't move, the horses didn't even move, a bolt or anything. He said they run a mile at the first sign of any kind of earth movement. And he said none of the buildings were moving. Sorry, it was only the buildings that were moving. And I studied on way back, and that is definitely a capacity of scalar, because it's a move and an instant effect, and no method of finding out how it were, unless you can trace the origin of the actual. I don't know whether it's a pulse, whether you'd say it's some form of magnetic discharge. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not what people think it is. Now the quantum guys speak in terms of, so if you're in the esoteric quantum kind of mindset, they play it with the, oh well, they do something here, send it up into the quantum field, and then it comes back and nobody knows where it came from. There's a big thing going down. So that's how they explain scalar in that sense. But it's more sort of, so if Australia had a blast like that, they can use the Earth as a sort of conduit without it. So the Earth's just a conduit. So it's hit effect immediately, and nobody has a bloody clue where it's come from. But it has to use something. Do you get what I'm saying? But HARP, and then there's ESAT as well, which I think is a more modern, which I'm not so sure I believe, because otherwise HARP wouldn't still be around. And HARP is all over the world, you know. We know the biggest ones in Alaska, so they say. But China's got them, the Russians have got them, we've got one here. They're everywhere. They're all over the shop. These HARP systems, these weather altering depots and such. Yeah, there's a real technology that's been set up everywhere that people are not aware of. Even if you're a bit savvy with some of this alternative view of what's actually taking place today, there's still so much to know in that tech world. It's quite worrying. And you know, Tesla, he's explained basically what it is, because they've obviously took everything he created and built it themselves in secret, and give us nuclear and all this nonsense to terrify the numpties with, you know. Because when I was growing up, they used to jump under chairs and thought they were all going to die on a nuclear bomb. And I used to think, well, whoa, it looked good. I'll have a look out window. I weren't good. As long as I could look out window and watch it, I weren't bothered. You know, like, yeah, let's watch the nuclear bomb. So, yeah, I didn't really get worried about that kind of stuff. And then acid rain and all. And some of the teachers were obsessed with it. They would trigger. One we called McCaffrey, Jimmy McCaffrey. And he used to absolutely shite himself about acid rain and nuclear bombs, and used to give long speeches about this garbage. And it was just like, and you could see all my generation going, oh, soaking it up like that. And I'm like, God's sake. You know, you had more chance of getting knocked over by a grandma on a pushback back then than you did, or actually struck by lightning, because we did get one of them bashed on at school. Oh, that was scary. You know, not me yet, anyway. Don't mess with that stuff, it's dodgy. Yeah, you don't want to be picking that stuff up off the floor. Sorry, frequencies. Yeah, of course. They're saying, aren't they, through HARP, they can actually affect the Gulf Stream, move it further up. So if you want to get a hot summer, they move the Gulf Stream slightly north so Britain gets baked. If they want a warmer winter, they bring it up. We get a nice winter. If they want it hellfire and garbage, they move it further down. And that's what we were seeing documents about back in, well, you're talking 12, 13 years ago. In fact, before then, that kind of documentation were actually out in books in the 90s. Even David Icke might have been writing about, I don't know whether he were writing about art in the 90s, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't, let's put it that way. So it's not a new concept. And the first, if I remember rightly, because it is a while since I looked at this, the first signal was found by the radio AM operators, and they called it woodpecker. Called it the woodpecker signal, if I'm correct, because it just sounded like a woodpecker. And that were noted in 94 and 96, something about that time, I think. But then I also saw stuff that reckons that this technology were going on before, even in the 70s. So I don't know, maybe it were a global reach in the 90s, but I don't know. I can't remember it. It's a long time. But yeah, they've been using it. I mean, Kobe earthquake is said to have been a product of this. The tsunamis, some of those tsunamis, not all of them, but some of them are also that you can tie them back to HARP activity. And they've traced that back, not just by saying it, but by tracing back the energy divergence. Where these energy pulses or whatever they might be come from, and they can trace it. And so many of these what they call natural disasters are no such thing. It's this technology. ESAT, got the geoengineering, because the chemtrails do quite a lot of things. They can absorb all the moisture out of the atmosphere, or they can add it. They also discharge metals, fine particles of metals into the atmosphere to help these systems work by ionizing the atmosphere. And the negative to that is, of course, it's getting into the soil. We're breathing it in. It's sticking to the trees, especially if it's aluminium and barium. I think those are the two that are highly inflammable. And of course, some of these fires that start, they can't put them out because, of course, all these trees are wrapped in this magnesium, aluminium kind of substance. And of course, if you remember back in chemistry, if you lit, well, we used to have a roll of it on our things until Sean set it all on fire, and then they stopped doing it. They'd put you a little bit. But if you lit the end of that, it used to glow white, and you could scare all girls with it, and it was good. So yeah, I did that. And then there was potassium, that if you put a bit of that in water, little tiny, it used to fizz. So Sean put the whole block in the sink just to see what it did. And it made quite a, yeah. Needless to say, I was no longer allowed in the chemistry lab. Or if I were allowed in, the clamps were on the table and I had to put my chin on the table with my ears clamped for the entire lesson. So I couldn't blow the lab up or do anything else mischievous. Yeah, they were good times, school. I enjoyed school, mate. Great. What were he calling him? Oh, God. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards. I remember you, Mr. Edwards. Yeah, I think you're sore. It's wonder I've got UGs, actually, with what you used to do to me, you bully. So, good chemistry. You cannot book a paradigm shift. You got to bend with it at least to go with a bit. Yeah, I agree. And those that have not done any due diligence in understanding what's really going on in this world are the ones that are going to get so fixed into this failing grid system. It doesn't bear thinking about, really, does it? It doesn't bear thinking about where it's going to go for that. It really doesn't. Yeah, because it operates in the ionosphere as well, doesn't it? It sends up massive radioactive energy into the ionosphere. And they can do all sorts of things. So it's also then been suggested that the problems in the 80s when they were talking about the ozone layer were in fact an effect of these testing this OIP system. And it's interesting as well, and this is something that I do say to a lot of people, because there's a lot of people, buy into the UFO stuff, and I'll remind them that I can't remember his name, the guy that brought the Pleiadians into play, as he said, what they introduced into everybody through him, Billy Meyer, that's him, was actually the ozone layer stuff. So was that a move to show us that they were using HARP, or was it really just one method of getting into people's minds that there's something wrong with our climate and that it needs to be fixed? And it can only be fixed by taxing the living daylights out of you and your children for the rest of their lives. So, you got to look at these things like that, haven't you? It's not all good. This climate thing. And surveillance, yeah. Well, everything they're doing is surveillance, isn't it? I mean, that graphene there, you don't even need your phone. Apart from it, you need your phone for it to tell you what to do. But you don't actually now need your phone. Once this graphene's took root, yeah. Well, of course, it's attracted to the organs that give out the most electromagnetic energy. So they're going to your heart. So the young people, it's going to their heart because they're fit, and the bloodstream's taking it directly there. So this is why that's affecting the young people. It's because by definition it's attracted to and the heart is, and then you've got your brain as well. But all your organs give off that kind of energy. So they're aiming to get it in all your organs. And But remember, if you don't, it would appear, now of course we don't know yet, but it would appear if you do no more, your body will eject it within a year. Yeah, and that's more than feasible. Our bodies are a quite amazing piece of kit, to be fair. I've got lost here. So somebody's late. Do they not give out notifications? Because I actually announced it this morning. So I don't think. Now YouTube have stopped me from. You upload a thumbnail to your video, so it has a decent picture. They won't let me do that anymore. Does anybody know why they might do that? Or not send me notifications when people become subscribers. And I mean, obviously, I don't know what's going on, but it goes up and then it all knocks off. So are people subscribing and then changing their mind? Or are they actually kicking people off? Which is a bit naughty, I do believe. Especially if people think I'm kicking them off. Your first earthquake, was it? So how did it feel for you, Jace? Because by all accounts, it wasn't an earthquake, was it? It was just the building shook. That's a terrifying concept. I mean, and Tesla called this technology the death ray, the death frequency, or something like that. Because he tested it and nearly collapsed a big, massive building near him. So, and this is where you get the suggestions that the Twin Towers might have had this energy applied to the Shindig too. Can you imagine if they can do that? There's no greater way of depopulation if all of a sudden everybody's asleep in beddy buys and you set this off and collapse everybody's buildings. What's that? That made me think, bloody hell, because I know there's been some odd stuff going on in America when you look at these fires. How the forests are fine and all of but the houses are in like crumbled dust and the cars have melted on the road. I mean, that's definitely not. That's not a fire, is it? That's some kind of weapon. That's some kind of heat weapon that must create such ridiculous heat. Everything just crumbles. It's so yeah, and you go back. I'm thinking back to the days of Iraq. There were doctors coming up with videos saying, "Look, we've come to see these people, and they don't know what weapons done this to them, and they do clean cuts, severed heads and arms, and straight across the torsos, just perfectly severed." Because if that's the case, then living out in sticks isn't going to save you, is it? And in fact, I had this out with a neighbour the other week. We were getting a little bit scared and worried because they do if you watch telly and they see what's being pumped out. And everybody's thinking, "Oh, I'm going to go here. I'm going to run off there." And I'm like, "Well, why? It's the same everywhere. This is not just. This is the new real. Better to face it here in your own place where you know the system, you know the people, the faces, but more importantly, you know what is allowed and what isn't. And when you put immigrants in a nation, they haven't got a clue what's going on. They're just going to say yes sir, no sir, because housing associations are giving them 4-bedroom houses. They're getting big fancy Jags and whatever you can Audis and BMs because they're getting disability. It all ties together. The whole corporate system, which is the reason why they can create these food shortage and this fuel shortage on nothing, out of thin air, by controlling the media. Well, according to my associates, Melbourne doesn't have ever earthquakes. It doesn't have them. She did relay one story her mother had told her from the 70s that There were one night she'd gone to bed and she was awake and she heard the biggest crack go right under in the earth, she said. So that puts you onto a very dubious Japanese group that were doing quite a lot. And this group they're like a secret society that want to reinforce the emperor of Japan, but not just of Japan, of the entire world. And that's a secret society that put that sarin gas on Japanese railways way back in the day. Just because following that little train, I did pick it up again. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. So the Doomsday Cult, Aum Shinrikyo or something. But they were doing some very strange experiments on sheep with, they thought, gases, and they also thought technology. This was back in the 70s. Oh, sorry. This was back in 1995. I do apologise. And this was going on in Australia. And this was a Japanese group playing with odd but very expensive equipment back in Oz. So yeah, that's another interesting thing that I've been giving a bit of an eye at this week. Now, I think this is something I want to just cover, and then we'll call it. But we were talking about before about, has it ever been the case that the church was something good, or has it always been the nonsense we can see it acting out today? And it's people like this that you can't ignore, that these people are real, they're solid, and they're moral, and they've been a part of it for all their life, like Malachi Martin, for instance. Now, there's two camps, each solid in their own belief into whether he was good or whether he was bad, and that's fine. You've got to watch him and make your own decision on that. But the thing I thought at the time was with Malachi that maybe that time when he had seen it's not what I'm doing anymore was in fact the time that it had to be announced that the church was no longer going to be what it had been. And that was Vatican II days, Because if that is the real case, and I believe that is, then Malachi was right to do what he did. And so this chap here, this is the Great Impasse, Archbishop Carlo Mario Vigano. So this guy's an archbishop, okay? So this guy, he says the world is changing, it's becoming darker. It is much like J.R.R. Tolkien's envisioned in his trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. Forces are gathering, they are moving into position. He says Archbishop Godard has been highly critical of the modern church, the Pope Francis, recent secular developments, the virus, the shot, and global plans for the new order. So he's interviewing this guy, and this guy that's interviewing explains to you that he grew up in the Catholic Church but became a traditional Bible-believing fundamentalist Christian and a patriot. And this guy is saying that even though he's now become a Bible-believing fundamentalist Christian, that he still says you need to listen to this guy. So I'm just going to go through this short question and answer with him because it's really interesting. And we do need to take this on board, especially because Malachi Martin were very adamant that no matter what they try and do to destroy Rome, the Vatican system is too vast to actually be disintegrated fully. So I've always took that on board, okay? Because if one man's going to know that, it's going to be somebody at the level that Malachi was, He's going to know this kind of stuff. I don't know why I keep looking over there. That's weird. So the question that this interviewer asks is, we're looking at the church in confusion and division concerning the New World Order, the present global pandemic, and how Christians react to this. What do you think of the current pandemic and the current confusion and the crisis? And his answer is, it seems clear to me that we are facing a siege on both the social and religious front. The so-called emergency pandemic has been utilised as a false pretext to impose the shot. And the green paper, the pass of the port. At the same time, on the other front, not only do the ecclesiastical authorities not condemn in the least the abuse of power by those who govern public affairs, but they support them in this wicked plan and go so far as to condemn those who do not accept being inoculated with an experimental gene serum with unknown side effects and does not impart any immunity from the bug, to say nothing of the moral implications related to the presence of genetic material derived from aborted fetus. We are at war, a war that is not openly declared. Exactly what I've been telling you. Since the United Nations, there has been no declaration of war. Yet war is going on all fronts, okay? A war that is not openly declared, that is not fought with conventional weapons, but a war all the same, in which there are aggressors and aggressees, executioners and victims. A war in which violence ensues in ostensibly legal forms in order to violate the rights of citizens as well as believers. It is an epochal war that is a prelude to the end times and the great apostasy spoken of in the sacred scripture. His second question, how can we explain what seems to be a new alliance? Answer, the alliance that you mentioned is not between state and church, but between the deep state and the deep church, which I would say is the secret societies and the corporations. So the deep church I'd class as the secret societies, which, as I understand them from my experiences, they are their own entity, okay? And if you listen to the purveyors of it, which I did, they claim to be in control of what we see as religion on the street. But this was relative to all the Protestant denominations, okay? And those that derive from that. So the Masonic never claimed to have the power in the Roman Church. Never did I hear that. Okay, allyship, yes, etc. And I saw it, but that was never a claim by any Masonic or Protestant purveyor of the occult side of things when I was running through that back in the day. This state has apathy to both natural law and divine and positive human law. The church has a hand with respect to the unchanging teaching of Christ. Of course, they blagged man to put their trust in the church to promote the gospel. That was it, nothing else, and to secure the possessions of those who chose to do that. Yeah, that was the original church mandate. The Carolinians changed that, as I've already discussed, when they invaded and took over the monasteries. All right, the Dominicans jumped on board, and all the other branches of the monastic orders jumped on board with this new creed that they created, which meant they could own land and they could own property. Let's have a look here. It is obvious that the rulers, including the President of the United States, are not pursuing the common good when they expose a population to experimentation without scientific basis. Even in the face of evidence of the shot's ineffectiveness and the damage it causes to those who have received it, and it is equally obvious that the ecclesiastical hierarchy, in supporting this massacre plan on the global level, supporting this massacre plan on the global level as an accomplice to a crime against humanity, and even more, to a very grave sin against God. Bergoglianism, or anti-capitalist man, has become God. Yeah, that's very true. Bolshevism, Marxism. Yeah, Marxism. Just to quote Karl Marx while I bring him up. This is an important where is it? Well, I'll have to paraphrase because I can't find it. But basically, Karl Marx said that all European revolutions crash on uh, the rocks of England, meaning the Constitution, which is why England is so important and why they are moving all hell to demolish it. So against anti-capitalist man has become God. Yeah, rewrite divine law is clearly integral to the plan of this great reset. On the one hand, it is pursuing ends that have nothing to do with the purpose of the Catholic Church, and in the other, because it hopes that its complicity can bring it some sort of political and economic advantage in view of the New World Order. This criminal complicity is there for all to see. The Church has made a scandalous and shameful alliance with people, in brackets the elite, whose goals are not the same as traditional Christian goals. So the third question he asks is, what price is the Church paying for making this choice? Answer: in order to do this, the Church hierarchy has had to abandon Christian doctrine, deny Christ, dishonour his Church. This is a prelude to the constitution of the universal religion, in brackets, a perverted, corrupt form of Christianity. The fourth revolution, theorized by Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, and forces within the church abuse moral authority in order to support the dissolution of traditional society and pursue the project of the demolition of the church in order to replace her with a philanthropic organization of Masonic inspiration. So this is your front billionaires. Okay. So now he's using the term Masonic, but this is where the priesthood comes into play. Okay. And that priesthood is vast and has pretty much got its claws into everything now. The majority of bishops align themselves obediently out of fear or self-interest. Today's hierarchy comes from university and Catholic institutions. Today's hierarchy comes from university and Catholic institutions, have been occupied by fifth columns, and have formed generations of clergy, politicians, intellectuals, bankers, entrepreneurs, professionals, and journalists that have been indoctrinated in progressive ideology. And just as the left has done in the political and cultural sphere, so within the church, the innovators have ostracized voices of dissent. The persecution we are witnessing today is no different from that of decades past, but now it has been extended to the masses. So he's basically saying this battle has always been going on with the church. It's now succumbed to the other, but the difference this time is they're now moving against the masses. So they're moving against the flock itself. So by that, I would take that they've taken control of the church, and now they can abuse the masses because people are still believing this garbage. So that's what Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has to say about the current situation, which is why I believe it's important we do come to understand whether our foundations were built in something solid, and we need to remember this and move this forward into the future for our future generations before we just all throw everything out as worthless, and then we're left with the vacuum that the protocols and, more importantly, Albert Pike's prophecies present. It's so important that we don't just rally on our... See, the thing is, and I've said this before, I don't have an edit. I haven't had a programmed edit as a child or even growing up. I've programmed my own edits, my own way. Now, awkward it might be, but it served me well. And especially now that I can apply myself to these situations without any colour of censorship or disposition towards one group against another. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I'm trying to say, you see, this is the thing, the Church of England, there are no voices like this in the Church of England. None. It's none. None whatsoever. I did go and join a Church of England church for a couple of years, hoping I could find a sort of a readying congregation that would get behind the nonsense that were going on, but wasn't the case. So I had to leave rather than cause any issues for the congregation, etc. Because it's just not there. So this, for me, we have to work out what we think and know is right, what it is we want to pass on to our future generations, and we need to start to come together in support of those formats, the people. This guy's voice needs to shine out louder than it's being given. This guy's an archbishop, and because we've all undone history, we've Jesuit this, it's Freemason this, blah, 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 blah. But all these institutions are made up of man. Are all man fixed on these negative paths? Or are there enough of us to recognise that some of these things need to be let go, but it doesn't mean we let go the morality, the sensibility of it, the structures, etc., etc., etc. Because if we don't start thinking those terms, we're not going to pass anything of worth on to our flea bags. And that, for me, is quite a worry. Especially if you accept reincarnation, then you're going to be coming back into your family line, and God knows what it's going to be like. Do you know what I'm saying? If the door doesn't open, you don't resurrect, you don't get up into the heavens, you're still earthbound, you're coming back. And the last thing you want to be doing is coming back into the line that you couldn't be asked to give a toss about now, maybe through your children or your grandchildren. Now, I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but I've studied all these doctrines, and I don't find anything in them that would make me think that couldn't be potentially possible. And it was actually taken out of the canon back in the earliest times. So, as I said, I haven't got an edit pre-programmed, only my own character and nonsense. But there's nobody else put a program in my mind to prevent me from looking at this guy and saying, this guy's rock and roll, what he's saying is profound, because it's also showing that the church hasn't always been this nonsense thing. He's telling you, the hierarchy have jumped on board with this unclean mess of, you know what I'm saying? So we need more voices like this, that people can look and go, well, hang on a minute. If this kind of language is coming out of institutions that have been powers for centuries, then maybe some of these guys on this alternative take on what's going on are not as dumb and stupid as the media teaches they are. So, I just thought that was important, and we do need to start to rally together regardless of where you come from and what your background is. I judge people in two ways. It's quite simple. Are you an asshole, or are you groovy? And that's it. I'm no interest in the asshole, none whatsoever. I'm not bothered. I'm not even bothered. I don't even want to argue with him. I don't want to put him right. Just piss off. I'm not interested. I'm focusing to people that are groovy, or want to be groovy, or aiming to be groovy, so that they can be fantastic and amazing like me. And with that, I will say, till the next time.